All right, so we've all been digging into Amy Orr-Ewing's work, and, she really tackles some big questions about faith and the Bible.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But today we're going beyond just the arguments.
Okay.
You want to understand Amy Orr-Ewing herself, right?
Yeah.
What made her perspective? What it is, what makes her such a prominent voice in these debates? Get ready to dive into the life and work of this fascinating thinker.
Well, what strikes me about Orr-Ewing is that she doesn't fit neatly into any one box.
Yeah.
She's this Oxford-educated theologian, but, she's equally comfortable debating skeptics on a university campus or engaging with everyday people who are wrestling with their faith.
It's like she bridges the gap between, the ivory tower and, real-world struggles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for someone who might not be familiar with her work, how would you describe Amy Orr-Ewing?
Well, she's a British evangelist and apologist.
Bye.
Which basically means she's passionate about sharing her Christian faith and defending its intellectual credibility. And she does it with this blend of academic rigor and personal warmth that's really captivating.
That makes sense because her writing doesn't feel stuffy or preachy at all.
Right.
It's like she's having a conversation with you, addressing your doubts and questions head on.
Exactly. And that conversational style is rooted in her own experiences. Did you know that she actually had to defend her faith in a pretty intense way even before she became well known?
Wait, really? Tell me more.
Oh, this is juicy.
This sounds juicy.
Okay, so picture this. It's the day before her wedding.
Okay.
And she's sitting for her viva, which is basically the final oral examination for her degree at Oxford.
Right.
And one of the professors, this well-known philosopher, really grilled her about the historical accuracy of the Gospels.
Wow.
Yeah, he questioned whether she actually believed that Jesus said the words that are recorded in the Bible or that the events even happened.
Whoa, talk about pressure.
Yeah.
The day before your wedding. That's a whole other level of stress.
Right. But she later said that experience was a turning point for her. It forced her to grapple with those tough questions and articulate her beliefs in a clear and compelling way.
It's almost like that trial by fire prepared her for the public arena, where she'd go on to debate some of the world's leading atheists and skeptics.
Absolutely. And that experience is woven into the fabric of her work.
Yeah.
You can sense that she's not just talking about faith in an abstract way.
Right.
She's grappling with those real doubts and anxieties that people have.
Okay, so she's this Oxford-trained theologian who's gone toe-to-toe with some of the biggest names in skepticism. But what's the core message she's trying to convey? What's at the heart of her work?
One of her central arguments, and this comes through in many of her books, like Why Trust the Bible, is that the Bible isn't just some ancient text full of myths and contradictions. She argues that it's intellectually credible, historically reliable, and offers satisfying answers to life's big questions.
That's interesting because you often hear people dismiss the Bible as outdated or irrelevant, especially in today's world.
Right.
But she's saying it still holds up under scrutiny.
Exactly. And she doesn't shy away from engaging with modern challenges to faith, like the rise of postmodern thought or the influence of identity politics.
Yeah.
In fact, she argues that these challenges actually make the Bible's message even more relevant.
Now, Why Trust the Bible is probably her most well-known book, right?
Probably, yeah.
What are some of the key questions she tackles in that one?
She dives into a lot of the classic questions that skeptics raise, like the reliability of biblical manuscripts, the historicity of Jesus, the problem of evil and suffering, even the seemingly sexist passages that people often point to.
Those are definitely the big ones.
Yeah.
It feels like she's anticipating the doubts that many people have and addressing them head on.
She really does. And she doesn't just offer vague platitudes or appeals to faith.
Right.
She brings in historical evidence, archaeological findings, and even insights from philosophy and science to support her arguments.
So it's not just about believing what you're told.
Right.
It's about using your mind, critically engaging with the evidence, and coming to your own conclusions.
That's one of the things I find refreshing about her approach.
Yeah.
She doesn't treat faith and reason as enemies.
Yeah.
She sees them as complementary ways of understanding the world.
All right, so we've got a sense of who Amy Orr-Ewing is and the central argument she's making.
Yeah.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty of her work.
Okay.
Let's unpack some of the specific examples and insights that make her such a compelling voice in contemporary theological discussions.
Let's do it. Starting with that topic, you mentioned the reliability of biblical manuscripts.
Okay.
It's a common criticism, right?
Yeah?
People claim that the Bible has been altered or corrupted over the centuries. So how does Orr-Ewing tackle this?
Well, she uses a comparison that I find really helpful.
Okay.
She points out that we have far fewer manuscripts of Plato's works, yet no one questions their authenticity.
Right.
But when it comes to the New Testament, we have thousands of manuscripts and fragments, some dating back to the 2nd century AD.
It's an incredible amount of evidence.
It is.
And what's fascinating is that Orr-Ewing actually argues that the variations we find between these manuscripts actually strengthen the case for the Bible's authenticity.
Wait, how do variations make it more authentic?
Well, she explains that if there had been some grand conspiracy to create a unified, perfectly consistent narrative, you'd expect to see very few variations.
Okay.
But the fact that we have variations, most of them minor and not affecting the core teachings, suggests that there wasn't any attempt to suppress different versions or manipulate the text for a specific agenda.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
It's like she's saying that the variations themselves are evidence of the text's organic development and transmission over time.
Exactly. It speaks to a level of honesty and transparency that you wouldn't expect if there was some grand cover-up happening.
Right.
And she even goes on to explain that the variations we do have been meticulously studied and documented by scholars, so there's a high degree of accountability in the process.
So it's not like these are secret hidden variations that are being kept from the public.
Right.
It's all out in the open for anyone to examine.
Absolutely. And she encourages people to do their own research, to look at the evidence for themselves and come to their own conclusions.
Now, another area where she dives deep is the question of miracles in the supernatural.
Yes.
This is one that often gets people really fired up, especially in our increasingly secular world.
Yeah, it can be a hot topic.
How does she approach this topic?
What I appreciate is that she doesn't try to force anyone to believe anything.
Okay.
She acknowledges the skepticism that many people have, especially those who hold a strictly materialistic worldview.
Right.
But she argues that a dogmatic commitment to materialism actually limits our understanding of the world.
It's like she's saying, don't rule out the possibility of something beyond the material just because we can't fully explain it with our current scientific understanding.
Exactly. And when it comes to the miracle stories in the Bible, she points out that they're not presented as fairy tales or myths.
Right.
They're grounded in the realistic reactions of the people who witnessed these events.
Give me an example.
Well, take the story of the disciples seeing Jesus walking on water.
Okay.
Their reaction isn't blind acceptance or giddy excitement.
Yeah.
They're terrified.
Right.
It's this mix of awe and wonder with a healthy dose of fear. It feels very human and relatable.
That's such a good point. It makes those stories feel more grounded in reality, even if they're describing something that seems impossible.
Exactly. And she even points out that even ancient historians, including those who weren't necessarily believers, acknowledged Jesus's reputation as a healer.
Oh, wow.
So there's historical evidence beyond just the biblical accounts.
Okay, that's interesting because I think we tend to view ancient people as being more superstitious or gullible.
Right.
But if respected historians were taking note of these events, it adds another layer of credibility.
It does, and it speaks to the impact these events had even on those who might have been skeptical.
All right, so we've got the reliability of manuscripts, the case for the supernatural. What's another hot-button issue she dives into?
One that's incredibly relevant today is the accusation of the Bible being sexist.
Ooh, that's a big one.
This is a big one, especially as we grapple with issues of gender equality and social justice.
Yeah.
So how does Orr-Ewing address this?
Well, she tackles it head on, and she does so by going straight to the source, the Bible itself.
Okay.
She analyzes the portrayal of women throughout Scripture, highlighting both the positive and the negative aspects.
So she's not trying to sugarcoat it or pretend that there aren't problematic passages.
No, she's very honest about that. But she also points out that the Bible needs to be understood in its historical and cultural context. And even within that context, there are remarkable examples of women being empowered and celebrated.
Okay, give me some examples. What are some of the specific stories or figures she points to?
Well, she talks about Jesus's radical inclusion of women in his ministry.
Okay.
Remember, this was a time when women were largely relegated to the domestic sphere.
Right. Yet Jesus had female disciples who traveled with him, learned from him, and were even entrusted with spreading his message.
Right, like Mary Magdalene, who was one of the first witnesses to the resurrection.
Yes.
And wasn't there that story about Mary and Martha, where Mary chose to sit at Jesus's feet and learn while her sister was busy with the, household chores?
Exactly. And what's remarkable is that Jesus commends Mary for her choice, saying she's chosen the better part.
Wow.
It's a powerful affirmation of women's right to spiritual learning and leadership, which was pretty revolutionary for that time.
So she's saying there's this thread of women being Active participants in the early church, not just passive followers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She points to women like Priscilla, who taught theology alongside her husband, and Phoebe, who's described as a deacon and leader in the church.
Wow.
These are women who were shaping the early Christian movement.
It really challenges that traditional image of women being silenced or relegated to the sidelines.
It does. And while she acknowledges that the Bible was written in a patriarchal culture,
Right.
she argues that it actually pushes back against those norms in significant ways.
Right.
Now, she also addresses those more challenging passages, the ones that seem to endorse patriarchal structures. But she urges us to read them carefully,
Okay.
taking into account the broader message of Scripture.
So it's about looking at the whole picture,
Yeah.
not just isolating certain verses.
Right. And she also emphasizes that the Bible is a living document that continues to speak to us today.
Okay.
So we can learn from its wisdom,
Yeah.
but we also need to be critical of its limitations and apply its teachings in a way that is relevant to our current context.
That makes sense. We can't just take everything literally. We have to engage with it thoughtfully and wrestle with its complexities.
Yes.
And speaking of complexities, what about war in the Old Testament?
Oh, yeah.
That's another one that often trips people up.
It's a tough one, no doubt. And Orr-Ewing doesn't shy away from the difficulty.
Oh.
She acknowledges that the violence depicted in the Old Testament, particularly the wars commanded by God,
Yeah.
can be disturbing to modern readers.
Good, because I think sometimes people try to brush over that or offer overly simplistic explanations.
She avoids that. She actually delves into the historical context,
Okay.
the specific language used,
Uh-huh.
and the complexities of interpreting these accounts.
So what are some of the key points she makes?
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of people, it's hard to reconcile the idea of a loving God with the violence portrayed in those texts.
Well, she emphasizes that just because something is described in the Bible doesn't mean it's endorsed by the Bible.
Okay.
Just because something happened doesn't mean God approved of it.
Okay, that's an important distinction. It's
Yeah.
about discerning between what's being described and what's being prescribed.
Exactly. And when it comes to the wars commanded by God, she argues that we need to understand them in the context of God's covenant with Israel and the specific historical circumstances of that time.
Not about God being inherently violent or bloodthirsty,
Right.
but about understanding the specific historical and theological context.
Right. And she reminds us that even in the midst of these war accounts,
Yeah.
there are examples of God's mercy and compassion.
Okay.
For example, she highlights the story of Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute who helps the Israelites and is spared from destruction.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
It's like even in the darkest moments, there's still this glimmer of hope and redemption.
exactly. And she also gets into the nuances of the language used,
Okay.
specifically the Hebrew word herem, which is often translated as utterly destroy.
I've always wondered about that word because the image that often comes to mind is this indiscriminate slaughter.
Right. But Orr-Ewing argues that this word needs to be understood in its ancient Near Eastern context,
Okay.
where it often had a more symbolic meaning than a literal one.
So it's not necessarily about wiping out every man, woman, and child, as some people might interpret it.
Exactly. She points to evidence suggesting that many of these battles were targeted at military strongholds and combatants,
Nope.
not entire civilian populations. It's more about conquering the land and establishing Israel's presence.
That makes a big difference. It changes the whole picture when you understand the nuances of the language and the historical context.
It does. And it's a reminder that we can't just read these accounts at face value.
Yeah.
We need to dig deeper, understand the nuances, and consider the broader historical and theological context.
It sounds like she's encouraging a more nuanced and informed approach to reading those difficult passages.
Yes.
Not just shutting down or getting offended, but actually trying to understand what they meant in their original context.
Exactly. And that leads us to another complex issue that she addresses.
Okay.
Sex and sexuality.
Oh, boy.
It's a topic that's often fraught with tension,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to reconcile ancient texts with modern understandings.
Yeah, that one's always a hot potato. Does she talk about specific issues like same-sex relationships?
She does. And as always, she approaches the topic with sensitivity and nuance.
Okay.
She acknowledges that the Bible has traditionally been interpreted as condemning same-sex relationships.
Right. And that's often used to justify discrimination and prejudice against LGBTQ plus individuals.
Absolutely. But she also points out that there's ongoing debate and discussion within the Christian community about how to understand those passages in light of our evolving understanding of sexuality.
Okay, so she's not just presenting a black and white view. She's recognizing the different perspectives that exist.
Yes, and she even highlights how some scholars are reinterpreting these passages, considering the cultural context and the original language, to argue that they might not be addressing what we understand today as committed same-sex relationships.
That's really interesting. It shows that even on these really sensitive and potentially divisive issues, there's room for thoughtful dialogue and reinterpretation.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I appreciate is that even while engaging in these complex discussions, she always emphasizes the importance of love, compassion, and respect for all people, regardless of their sexual orientation.
It sounds like she's trying to find a way to hold on to her convictions while also being open to new understandings and perspectives.
Yes. And she reminds us that the Bible's ultimate message is about love, reconciliation, and the flourishing of all humanity.
That's a beautiful message. So we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Manuscripts, miracles, sexism, more sex.
It's a lot.
Are there any other major themes from Why Trust the Bible that we should touch on?
Well, one that underpins all of these discussions is the question of how we can actually know anything for sure.
Right.
In a world of information overload and competing truth claims, it can be really hard to know what to believe.
That's so true, especially in the age of social media where everyone has an opinion and it's easy to get caught up in echo chambers.
Exactly. And Orr-Ewing dedicates a whole chapter in Why Trust the Bible to exploring the nature of knowledge and how we can arrive at truth.
Okay.
She talks about the challenges of postmodern thought, which questions the very possibility of objective truth.
So is she saying that truth is relative and that it's all just a matter of perspective?
Not at all. She actually pushes back against that idea.
Okay.
She argues that while our perspectives and biases do influence how we see the world, that doesn't mean that truth itself is subjective or that all truth claims are equally valid.
Okay, so how does she navigate that tension between recognizing the influence of our perspectives and still affirming the possibility of objective truth?
Well, she encourages us to be humble and self-aware, recognizing that our own understanding is always limited.
Right.
But she also encourages us to be courageous in our pursuit of truth, to be willing to examine the evidence, to engage with different perspectives, and to allow our beliefs to be challenged.
So it's about being both critical and open-minded, right? Not just clinging to our own beliefs, but being willing to have them tested and refined.
Exactly. And she reminds us that the process of seeking truth is often messy and challenging. It involves wrestling with doubts, asking tough questions, and sometimes even changing our minds.
But it's a worthwhile journey, right?
It is.
Because ultimately we all want to live in accordance with what's true and real.
Absolutely. And Orr-Ewing believes that the Bible offers a reliable guide on that journey.
Okay.
It's not a magic formula or a set of easy answers.
Right.
It's a collection of writings that, when engaged with thoughtfully and prayerfully, can help us to understand ourselves, the world around us, and the God who created us.
It sounds like she's offering a path toward a more grounded and meaningful faith.
Yeah.
One that's not based on blind acceptance, but on a willingness to wrestle with tough questions and to seek truth wherever it may lead.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's why her work resonates with so many people.
Yeah.
Both those who are deeply committed to their faith and those who are wrestling with doubts and questions. Yeah. She meets people where they are and invites them to embark on a journey of intellectual and spiritual discovery.
And she does it with a warmth and humility that makes her so relatable. It's not about winning arguments or proving points, but about genuinely seeking truth together.
Exactly. And that brings us back to what we were discussing earlier, about the power of her personal story.
Okay.
She doesn't just talk about these issues from a detached academic perspective.
Right.
She shares her own struggles and doubts and how those experiences have shaped her understanding of faith.
That's so powerful because it makes her seem more human, more relatable.
Yeah.
It's like she's saying, hey, I've been there too. I've wrestled with these same questions. And here's what I've learned.
Exactly. And that authenticity is what makes her such a compelling voice.
Right.
You get the sense that she's not just trying to convince you of something, but that she's genuinely sharing what she's discovered on her own journey.
So if someone's been reading Amy Orr-Ewing's work, maybe even wrestling with some of these questions themselves, what's the one thing you'd want them to take away from this deep dive into her life and work?
That's a great question. I think the key takeaway is this. The Bible is a book worth engaging with. It's a book that has the power to challenge us, to inspire us, and to transform us. But it requires us to approach it with an open mind.
Yeah.
A willingness to wrestle with its complexities, and a desire to encounter the God who reveals himself through its pages.
So it's not about shutting down our minds or blindly accepting everything we read.
No.
But about actively engaging with the text and allowing it to speak to us in new and unexpected ways.
Absolutely. And I think Amy Orr-Ewing's work shows us that it's possible to engage with the Bible in a way that is both intellectually rigorous and spiritually enriching.
Okay.
It's a journey of discovery that can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves, the world around us, and the God who created us.
And that journey can be challenging, even unsettling at times.
Yes.
But ultimately, it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. And I think Amy Orr-Ewing's work is a testament to that. She's shown us that it's possible to hold on to our faith while also engaging with the tough questions, to embrace the complexities of the Bible without shying away from the difficult parts.
It's like she's saying, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to doubt, because it's through that process of wrestling and questioning that we often come to a deeper and more authentic faith.
Well said. And I think that's a message that resonates deeply with many people today, especially those who are trying to navigate the complexities of faith in a world that often seems hostile or indifferent to it.
It's a message of hope, a message of encouragement, a message that says, you're not alone in this journey. And there's beauty and meaning to be found, even in the midst of the struggle.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Amy Orr-Ewing's work so valuable.
Yeah.
It's not just about defending a set of doctrines or winning arguments.
Right.
It's about helping people to connect with something deeper, something more meaningful, something that can sustain them through the challenges of life.
It's about encountering a God who loves us, who knows us, and who desires to walk with us on this journey.
Beautiful.
And that, I think, is a message worth sharing.
Yeah, it's like she's saying, it's okay to have those doubts, bring them to the table. Exactly. She's not afraid of the tough questions, in fact.
Yeah.
It's like she enjoys them.
She seems to.
And I think that's what makes her work so relevant for people today.
Right.
Especially like young people who are growing up in a world where faith is often seen as naive or outdated.
So it's like she's saying, hey, it's okay to question. It's okay to doubt wrestle with these things. It doesn't make you a bad Christian or a weak believer.
Yeah.
In fact, it can actually lead you to a deeper and more authentic faith.
Yes, and that connects to another important theme in her work.
Okay.
This idea that faith isn't just about believing a set of doctrines or following a set of rules. It's about a relationship.
Okay.
A personal encounter with God.
That resonates with me. It's not just about head knowledge.
Right.
It's about heart transformation.
Right. And she argues that the Bible is a key part of that transformative process.
Right.
It's not just a historical document or a collection of moral teachings.
Right.
It's a living word that can speak to us in profound and unexpected ways.
You know, it's funny because when you hear people talk about Amy Orr-Ewing, they often focus on her intellect, her debating skills,
right,
her ability to, engage with complex theological arguments.
Oh, she's brilliant.
She is brilliant. But what I've always found so compelling about her work is that it's ultimately about encountering a person.
Yeah.
It's about getting to know the God who reveals himself through the Bible.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's not just about winning arguments or defending a worldview.
Yeah.
It's about a relationship, a love story, a journey of discovery.
Exactly. And I think that's why her work resonates with so many people, even those who come from different faith backgrounds,
right,
or who are skeptical of organized religion.
Yeah.
There's something deeply human and universal about this longing to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Yes.
To find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless.
Absolutely. And she offers a path towards that connection, a path that's both intellectually honest and spiritually fulfilling.
Well, folks, there you have it. A deep dive into the life and work of Amy Orr-Ewing.
It's been a pleasure.
We've explored her background, her central arguments, and some of the key themes that run through her writing. But more than that, we've hopefully caught a glimpse of what makes her such a compelling voice in contemporary theological discussions.
She's a thinker who challenges us to use our minds to wrestle with those tough questions and to be open to new ways of understanding faith and the Bible.
Yeah.
But she's also a guide who points us beyond the intellectual debates to a deeper encounter with the God who loves us and desires to transform us.
So if you're looking for someone who can make the Bible come alive, who can tackle the tough questions without shying away from complexity, and who can point you towards a deeper understanding of God, look no further than Amy Orr-Ewing.
She's a voice worth listening to, and her work is an invitation to embark on a journey of discovery,
Right.
a journey that can lead to a more authentic, more grounded, and more joyful faith.
And as you continue on that journey, here's a final thought for you to ponder. Does Amy Orr-Ewing's approach make you more open to exploring the Bible? What aspects of her arguments resonate with you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep diving deep.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pages to Dialogues. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found valuable insights to apply to your life. If you did, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Pages to Dialogues, for more thought-provoking dialogues on Christian books. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on this episode. Please leave a comment below and let's continue the conversation. If you know someone who would benefit from our discussions, please share this episode with them. Your support means the world to us. Finally, if you appreciated this episode, please give us a thumbs up and a like. It helps us reach more people and continue creating content that inspires and uplifts. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to engaging with you on our next episode of Pages to Dialogues.